Welcome back, my fellow patriots, to Save Our Republic daily video series. Today we're continuing our exploration of the Bill of Rights with Amendment number 9, which provides as follows. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, this is a very interesting amendment, Amendment number 9, which is rarely cited by the United States Supreme Court or other courts of the United States, state courts or federal courts, but it is very important, and I want to explain why. At the time of the adoption of the initial Constitution, there was no Bill of Rights, and there was a debate at the Constitutional Convention about whether or not a Bill of Rights should be added, and the argument fell between two sets of actors or lines of argument. The first was that England had a Bill of Rights. The United States should have a Bill of Rights. We should list out specifically the rights reserved to the people to make sure that they're protected. The other argument was, no, the federal Constitution is entirely different than the English Constitution. In England, the government had all the power that a government would have unless there was a specific protection of inalienable rights in the Bill of Rights or elsewhere in the fundamental law of England. And therefore, you would need to carve out freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, due process. All those things needed to be listed. But in the United States Constitution, we have a government of enumerated powers, which means that unless there's an express grant of power to the federal government can't act to infringe the authorities or rights of the people, and therefore, unless it specifically said that the government had the right to infringe on your, say, free press rights, that it didn't have that authority. And that argument actually prevailed at the Constitutional Convention. But through the Constitutional Convention debates and the various ratifying conventions in the states, the argument was looked at with great skepticism, and basically what happened is there was a gentleman's agreement that if the Constitution was adopted, that the federal government would quickly craft a Bill of Rights and send it out to the states for ratification. That's exactly what happened, and James Madison fulfilled that gentleman's agreement by taking what initially was 17 proposed amendments and whittling it down with a committee to 10, and actually 12, and then sending that out for ratification, 10 of which were adopted immediately, or pretty close to immediately, one of which got adopted many, many years later. And to give comfort to those who wanted a Bill of Rights, and to give comfort to those who thought we didn't need a Bill of Rights, Amendment 9 was drafted to ensure that the fact that one right was specifically written down to be protected didn't mean that there were no other rights. And for example, there is no right to marry someone. There is no right to direct the fundamental education of your children. There is no right to travel among the states. That is specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And there's no right to leave the country and be able to come back. Those are what we would normally consider to be fundamental rights. There's no right to sell your property or to own property. There's due process protections for the deprivation of property, but not necessarily to own property. And there's a whole slew of rights that we could think of that aren't specifically delineated in the Constitution. And so instead of saying that the only rights that you have are the ones that are specifically written down in the Constitution. So if we forgot about the right to marriage, if you forgot about the right to direct the fundamental education of your children, you forgot about the right to travel between states, that didn't mean you didn't have that right. It just meant that it wasn't specifically enumerated, and the courts and other constitutional authorities could work that out. So that's what Amendment 9 is about, is to ensure that just because they didn't think of every single possible thing that would need to be and assumed to be protected by the Constitution, that if it wasn't listed, that didn't mean it wasn't protected anymore. And so we will see that there are rights that are not explicitly written down, which are protected through something like the Ninth Amendment. Sometimes it's nowadays, usually through what we call substantive due process, which does sound like an oxymoron. And they get these rights through in different ways in the Constitution. But basically, that's what the Ninth Amendment was designed to do. So it's an important fundamental provision of the Constitution. It was essential to adopting the Bill of Rights, which in turn was essential to having the Constitution adopted. So just because it's not listed doesn't mean it's not protected. And we should remember that. And it's a bulwark of our freedom and liberties and our unalienable rights. With that, until next time, don't forget about America's Survival Guide at americasurvivalguide.com, Patriot Week at patriotweek.org, and the Patriot Lessons American History and Civics podcast, as well as the Patriot Lessons TV show. You can learn about those at patriotweek.org or otherwise on the internet. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. God bless you, and God bless America.